All right, so we have our panelists here to answer any questions you all might have. Oh, we've got one, yes.
So thank you so much for wonderful talks on disciplinary teamwork that goes on with this. Given the escalation and exponential increase in processes and practices associated with this, we have to address the workforce development issue. It's been an issue in healthcare in general and also in the clinical research space. What have you done to build your teams, or have you re-engineered current teams to meet the demands you are in right now and what you anticipate in the future with, education, training, continuous professional development, et cetera? And you all have different respective areas, so the answers may be different.
Maybe I can try to tackle that question from a nursing point of view. Coming from an inpatient background, what we did was we created a role just to manage cell therapies, especially with the up and coming gene therapies that are going to be coming hot and heavy, and also the clinical trials. So we have someone who really has their pulse on clinical trials, as these patients can be in the hospital for 7 to 14 days after CAR T therapy. And that's hopefully going to make future-proof at least like the nursing workforce. Correct, internally, yes.
So from a pharmacy standpoint, what we've done is we have dual pharmacists tackling the inpatient area. What we've done to we haven't added or subtracted, but what we're doing now is finding standing meetings with study coordinators, study teams, nursing. We have a weekly meeting with our nursing staff and the coordinators so that we can all talk about upcoming admissions, what this means. We also have a monthly meeting to talk about new studies, what's coming through, what the nursing ratio is, what does pharmacy need to add to their process flow that could be different because of this particular study. So there's a lot of additional meetings, but those are usually now streamlined. So our Friday meetings, which is probably one of my absolute favorite meetings, everyone's kind of just on their game. They have their schedules ready to go. And we talk through when the admission's coming through. We kind of hit the bullet points as we go. We talk about everything from procedural, if they need a COVID test, for example, when was the last time they were here? What were some things we looked out for this patient? If we're holding therapy, what's going on with that patient? So we're tracking. We have weekly announcement go through to specific staff across the gamut of who these patients are coming through. We've also talked a lot more frequently with the cell therapy labs. We do a lot of scheduling with them, and we do talk with them in advance when we do know a patient is coming to help coordinate the delivery of those cell products, because they are down the road and around the corner. They're not next door to us. So we do have to develop that as well.
I can answer for a manufacturing perspective. We actually have a training program. We have oversight by our QMS, so training is required as part of our daily process in general. And so, for the purposes of this, we really do focus on aseptic training and then product handling. And we have our own internal procedures for that. So in general, we've been developing our program and making our training program more robust. So when we bring in new people, that we have some basic things that we teach them before we ever put them on a process. And then for specific projects or clinical trials, we actually may have some required training with the sponsor to make. They have their own clinical and regulatory team that provide oversight of the trials. So they're usually coordinating with us and giving us training before we actually start handling their product and delivering it to IDS. And we always usually end up doing a mock run before we actually do the real clinical trial. For instance, this week we've had a team from a company in there training us for 2 days in preparation for a dose prep that we're going to do next week. And also something that's new, the CIRM, well, the California manufacturing network is implementing a workforce development team, and we just started meeting about a couple of weeks ago or so, and I'm a member of that. So we're also going to be developing training as part of the CIRM network going forward.
Is this working? Okay. For us, we have specific nurses that are trained in cell therapy. They usually also do bone marrow transplant, but they're trained so that they understand what kind of side effects to look for. Our actual infusions outpatient are given in the infusion center, which is a little bit less broad and less specific. But we've given specific talks to the nurses in the infusion center so they know what to look for. And then we have our clinical nurse coordinators, which are specific for cell therapy. And I truly don't know what I would do without them because they're so organized, make sure that we know what we have to have all our ducks in a row. And then also our research nurse team is amazing if we're doing any sort of clinical trials to make sure we're monitoring everything appropriately. We also have our big team meeting. I think that's an amazing place where everyone from all the disciplines comes together and talks about sort of new trials or things that we're doing. Usually they'll give a talk if we have a patient who's going to be enrolled on something new. And then we also have a leukemia lymphoma meeting that's separate from our cell therapy meeting that talks about upcoming patients. So we're kind of aware of where people stand throughout the process. But definitely need people specific in cell therapy because it's very nuanced.
So for City Pub at the Stem Cell Lab, personnel is definitely a difficult, for all labs, a difficult prospect to find the qualified candidates. And with the cell therapy lab, it's extremely difficult because there's not many people who have experience in a cell lab as a processing center or handling infusions at the bedside. So most people that we get, we're having to train from the ground up, and they're all CLS. So they're used to mostly running, tests on analyzers and looking at microscopes and, doing microbiology. They're not used to handling products and making doses and, working aseptically under a hood for a product that's going to be infused to a patient. So that does become a challenge. It takes a long time to train these people to get them, so that they can actually process even just for standard care. And then you throw in something like CAR-Ts and, research products, which vary so much from one product to the next on how you handle them. And within research, you get your cell handle manuals that sometimes can change 3, 4, 12 versions before the study's done, and it's constantly changing. And so one of the things that we try to do to help with our staff so they can keep up with these kind of changes is we have the cell handle manual obviously available for them, but we also generate a job aid so that it breaks down the steps that they're doing at receipt of the product when they're going to, take the product out of the cryo shipper or the freezer before their infusion. How do they handle it? Does it have to be diluted? And all the little steps. That way it's right there. It points them into the cell therapy manual on how to handle it as well by pages, but it gives them a basic overview. And then we do individual training before they handle the product, as well as them having to read that and look through the cell handling manual. It's just too much to have everybody trained up on each protocol because we have so many going on, and sometimes we don't even get patients for a protocol. So that does become a challenge. We have currently 2 staff that manage our research and commercial protocol. We have a lead and we have an internal coordinator as well. So they help with training. They keep, they work with the sponsors and the research staff, to make sure this is working properly. But yeah, it is difficult, very difficult. So thank you.
I have one more thing. One thing that I think is a positive, and I think you could probably agree with this, is once you're trained in how to give the cells and how to monitor for the complications, despite what the different clinical trial is, what you're looking for is usually pretty similar. So once people have training on like what sort of complications to look out for, or how to handle a transfusion reaction or something like that, the little nuances don't matter as much usually if you have someone specific looking at those.
All right. Question in the back.
I have a question, and I apologize if I'm a little behind at times here. When I was here at City of Hope previously, we were doing all the clinical trials on the now FDA approved CAR-T products. And so we didn't have a pharmacy component in that process previously. Oh, sorry. For tomorrow, Saturday. So we did obviously the apheresis, and all the cells went to the cell lab and they got processed and sent to the manufacturer, and then they came back and they went to the cell lab and then they came to the floor. So there was no pharmacy interaction there. So I'm just very curious as to how pharmacy got inserted into the process, and whether you're just doing commercial products in the pharmacy or you're doing all the products in the pharmacy. I'm just curious. So thank you.
Sure, that's a good question. So I understand that completely, because previously this was not something that did go through pharmacy. And every institution is different. And at UCSD, the way we've developed it is the continuity of care. And so as things started to develop more and more, and we had more BMT studies and then suddenly solid tumor, it just seemed to kind of organically move in that direction that pharmacy was involved. And whether it's a DIN number or a lot number or a milligram dose or a cell dose, it does go through pharmacy because it's going through as a medication order. And depending on the institution and the rationale, it should be treated like a drug. Breyanzi, for example, was FDA approved. It has an NDC. Because of the stability, now that has moved into the commercial space within pharmacy, where we're developing and drawing up doses in pharmacy. And a lot of it has to do with, it's multifactorial. It's location of getting things from point A to point B in that 2-hour window. And then also the fact that these are going through for approval and they are now considered drugs. We're handling more and more. And so as the space grows, I think there's a lot more overlap. And so in a way, yes, it is. There are more people involved, but I think it's just really a wonderful progression into that space where you do have that collaboration. I think before, when it didn't go through pharmacy, perhaps it was just much easier to kind of swerve around it. But now I personally feel like there's more continuity of care there. I know the background of those patients, and there's more collaboration across the board, regardless if you're talking with the lab or the nurses. So I think it was just a natural progression that way. And I think, again, every institution is different. I talk with some pharmacists up in Ohio or in San Francisco, and they all do different things. Some of the pharmacists are doing cell counts, and some of the pharmacists don't touch it. And our collaboration is more, I think, somewhere in the middle of the road, where we're assisting with bedside thaw and we're drawing up volumes. We're helping with closed system transfer devices and knowing how to handle those things, because we may not know the answer to all of these pieces and we may not be the point of contact, but knowing the chain of custody and knowing where to ask, I think, is just as helpful as being directly involved. So just a short story long, I feel like it just kind of moved in that direction on its own. So.
And also with it becoming commercialized, then there was the charge component to it. And so from the City of Hope side of things, they're the ones who do the POs. They do the ordering through specialty pharmacy, and they don't go quite as far as they do with cell counts and such, but they do have the component related to the financial aspects that probably was not there when it was a clinical trial. And then they also help, with treatment plans, with order sets. They help, with the TOSI. They have to have the 2 set doses, and they have to track the total amount that they have. And then, of course, when we had the fludarabine shortage and when we had the TOSI shortage and all of that they have become much more involved in the whole process. But for actual cell counts and such, we do have the dispenser as being our stem cell processing lab. And so they don't have that piece of it. But I think the financial component really pulled them in, and then all of the REMS that was associated with it as well, that compliance goes through pharmacy.
This kind of is a question following up on that. So when I did my talk and I was like, is this a drug? Our pharmacy had it was hard for them to realize they had to take a role in it because they don't touch our product at all. It goes goes to our stem cell lab, and then from that lab, it will come to the bedside and we infuse it. Their only role is placing the product order and making sure we get paid. So you actually get the products in your pharmacy?
So yes, they get delivered either directly to our pharmacy in the door. And then we review all of the documentation. We're building the treatment plans. And yes, I agree with the REMS program. Pharmacists are getting involved that way as well. So with the investigational component, it does come through our office. And as you know, sponsors love forms. And so we do the receipt forms, we do the preparation forms, we do the dispensing administration forms. And so there's usually a double sign off on that. And we do have our internal verification. So yes, it does come to us depending on the pathway. Pharmacy is at bedside to do the double verification with the DIN number, chain of custody. And depending on the product and administration, we're either there to we do the identification and then we kind of retreat. And so we keep an eye on the queue. If there's any reaction to the infusion, we're ready to go with that. But yes, it comes to us directly. We evaluate it, then we release it to the endpoint, like bedside or 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 wherever it needs to go.
Okay. And do you guys have Zynteglo at yours? Do you have Bluebird's products with you?
We do. But
and okay.
Yes. Yes.
Wow, that's great. Thanks.
Any other questions? I don't see any questions from online. All right. Well, thank you.